Got it. So this week, week 3, we're going to be talking about using JavaScript in the websites. Okay, so the 4 things we're going to go over, as always, is the review. We're going to go over what JavaScript is, how exactly it works, how you're going to code it up. We're not going to get too advanced into the JavaScript part of it because we're going to focus more on how we're going to use it with the website. And 3, we're going to focus on JavaScript coding, like how to store data, how to use data in functions and do calculations. And then number 4 is going to be like modifying HTML and kind of doing an interaction or a little project based on interaction. So something that's going to come up, especially this week, it's kind of important to know is this idea of the ID in the class. Class isn't going to be as important. We're just going to focus on ID for now. But all you need to know is that how this ID that's put in the tags, or especially the first tag, it's going to be storing this little word here, right? And that's going to basically signify one specific tag in HTML, like one element. So if we wanted to modify something about one element, like the styles, like the things we talked about, like color, font size, margins, everything we talked about to this point, we use this ID attribute right here. And in there, we can use this ID basically with JavaScript and CSS, which we're going to get to later. And then, like we said, you can assign multiple classes, but IDs usually only apply to one element. So IDs are specific only to one element. And then we talked about the CSS styles, and there's modern styles. And we talked about borders and like the different styles from last week. And we have references to all of these from last week as well. So you can look at that whenever you want.
As we previously mentioned, JavaScript is just pretty much a programming language that we can use to interact with our HTML and CSS and our user. So it pretty much links our website with the user. And we're not going to go into JavaScript as a whole, but we'll learn enough to create basic interactions. So, for example, we have buttons on our website, but we actually haven't done anything with them. When you click them, nothing's going to happen. So, for example, we've created just a button here that says click me. And we're going to add something called an on-click attribute, similar to IDs, classes, CSS, whatever, styles. On-click is another attribute that we can add that pretty much links to our JavaScript. So when we add this on-click is equal to greet, notice the parentheses. We'll get into that later. Those are called functions. But despite adding this, nothing's going to happen. So before we actually go into functions, we have to understand what a function truly is. So fundamentally, functions are pretty much you give in inputs to a machine or whatever, and you get an output. Similar into math, I'm not sure if you guys have learned functions, but you give in a value and you get an output value. And another terminology we use is something called arguments, which is input values that we give to our function. So an example of this would be, say there's a function for getting the weather, and an argument, a potential argument could be where are we getting the weather from? So this is the syntax for a function. Notice that there's a keyword called function, which tells JavaScript that what we're adding inside is a function. And then this is the name of our function. What precedes that is the name of our function. And add on parentheses, we'll go into what those are later. And open brackets, similar to CSS, tells the compiler or the computer what the code inside is. So in this case, the function greet, which we named greet, is going to do something related to an alert. And it's probably going to say something similar to hello. So since we've never done alerts before, I'll show you guys what it does. So alert, if you are to run an alert, it gives a little pop-up. Okay, so if we are to use our function greet, it's simply going to create an alert called hello. Link these together. So I'm going to type this all out really quick. Created a button, and we added the on-click argument, and we said something like say hello. And we added text to this called click. We added text to this called click me. And we close the button. If we add into our JavaScript, let me scroll in a little. In our JavaScript, if you added the similar syntax, function, say hello, followed with parentheses and curly brackets, we can create alert, message, hello, world, or whatever you want to say. Make sure to end your code with semicolon. So now when I click this, it's going to say hello world. So what the onClick is doing is it's telling HTML that whenever we click on the button, we want to run the function say hello. And it runs the function by adding those parentheses.
Works. Okay. So we're gonna go kind of back to basics. I'm sure if anyone here has done coding before, you're kind of used to how like variables and things like that work. But just as far as JavaScript goes, it's going to be kind of important to know how we can assign like values to variables, data, or other things, and how it only works in one way. So first of all, if we wanted to make a variable like this, a variable is just something that stores data, and you always have to use this keyword var before you do it, right? So anything following the word var with a space, that's going to be the word or letter that represents the variable. And then you can use that variable as basically like a substitute for the data itself. So if I had a variable x here and I set it equal to 5, then x would basically become a substitute for the value 5. And the way we always have to do it in this format where variable, this keyword var, name is equal to data. And so you see it right here. And then we can actually use the example of alert like Audie introduced before. If we had this variable x here and we give it the data value 5, just alert x. And then when that runs, it should give us 5, just like that. Yeah. And a really important distinction is, okay, first off, we can use words or letters to represent variables, but you can't use like numbers themselves, obviously. You can't say like 55 is equal to 10 or say 55 is equal to a string. That kind of assignment doesn't work. So we need to use like words or letters like this to signify it. And there's only one right way of doing this. So you can only have variables on the left side of your statement, and you can only set them equal to something in one way. So the correct way to do it is just like we did it up here, but an incorrect way of doing it would be doing the other way. So it's similar to math, but it's not exactly the same as like in algebra, if any of you have done that before. It's not like you can't just say 5 is equal to x, but x is equal to 5 works. So this top statement here wouldn't work. This bottom statement does, as we show here. And it's really easy to do calculations with these numbers and things. It's basically kind of like how you do with a calculator yourself. You can subtract, add, multiply, and divide just as you do in a calculator normally. So if I wanted to do like, say this is my calculation, right? And before we even use that, I could actually just say alert maybe 5 plus 5 plus 6. What this should be is, it's a little late. What should give us is 16, right? Because it's just like a calculator statement. Just like how you put something in a calculator, you could do the same thing in JavaScript, right? But like Audie was talking about with functions, you can actually put variables instead of just raw data into functions too. So if I said my calculation was like 5 times 5, 25, plus 10, then my calculation should now store, this variable called my calculation should store the value 35. So if I pass my calculation, just like how I pass normal data into the alert function, it should alert the value 35, like we see up here. And if we want to use strings or like word data, which is going to be really important for like if we want to deal with elements and tags in HTML when we're using the JavaScript, then we just surround everything with these little quotation marks. And these quotation marks basically signify that that variable is going to have a string content inside of it. And the string content is just going to be words. So instead of using numbers like we did here, I just said like var name, this time is equal to, this is my name, Berkan. And it would just have the word Berkan inside that name. And it wouldn't treat it like a number or anything. It would just be treated like a word. I could actually say age. I could set another number, it's 816. So how would I add these two together? Well, JavaScript makes it super easy to like concatenate or put these strings together. Well, age isn't a string here, but you can add multiple kinds of data variables or multiple types of data into a string if you want to do that. So I could actually say name and age, that this is equal to age. And then if I alerted this, wow, it does it really fast. Alerted this, it would actually give, oh, and I didn't add a space in between it, so it's kind of stuck together. But you can see how it's really easy to just add strings together or add a bunch of statements together to make one big long word like that, like Berkan 16, my age, my name and my age. And then just like the function we used earlier for alert, as I just showed here, you can put any kind of variable inside of a function, right? But another really important aspect of functions is they don't just go one way. They don't just take a data value and then they just spit something out on the screen, right? Sometimes we want a function to actually do something and give us back a data value. So we don't have to define too many of our own functions, but I'm just going to make one for a demonstration. So if I made a function like combine words, and I had these things like the arguments, like an alert, it only takes one argument. When you put something in alert, the argument would be whatever I put inside these parentheses right here. So if I said alert, hello, right? The argument here would just be in quotations the word hello. And right now it's not working because there's an error in the code, but that's it. If I want to specify what arguments I want in a custom function, of course we need these curly braces when we make functions, and I'd have to do something like word one, word two. Because in this function, I want to combine two words. So what that's saying is every time I call this function combine words, I'm going to need two data values. I'm going to need a data value for word one and a data value for word two. And again, these could either be raw data, like the word hello, or I could just make a variable word and say equal to hello, and then pass that into the function later. But I'll show you how to do that soon. The important part here is this new keyword, which is return. So what return functionality of a function does is basically instead of just having a function do one thing and then we never use it again, we sometimes want to use the data that like we want the function to do a calculation, or we want the function to modify the data somehow. And then we want to use that modified data and store it again. So in this case, if I had like, let's say I made a variable called big word. And I wanted a big word to have a sentence inside of it, but I have multiple words I want to put in the sentence and combine it up. So I could use this combine functions function. I could say something like hello, which should be my first word. And then you separate by commas. Whenever you're doing arguments or multiple variables in a function, you have to separate them by commas because that way, that's how the computer's gonna understand that you have multiple arguments being put in the function. What I do is I put combined words, and I put my first data value, so word one, and I put my second data value, which is word two. And so inside of big word is now going to be the data that is returned by this function combined words. When I call the function or I invoke the function, it's going to take these two data values, it's going to add them up, and then it's going to return them almost like any normal data value. So combined words here, it could just also be replaced by hello. But as functions get more complicated and we have more complicated tasks to do, of course, we're going to need functions because not everything can just be coded out like in quotations like we have here. So sometimes we need functions to do things like this. And if I wanted to print the function output, I could just put the variable that has the function's output value in it. And then we'd see the combined sentence right here. Hello world. We're speeding through this a lot, but and we realize it's kind of hard to remember all this in maybe one day. So we're going to post some references to this after class as well. But yeah, as we saw, we combine these, and if I use words like Tom and Jerry, it'd be the same thing. We just alert a sentence called Tom and Jerry. So everything up until now has just been to make sure you understand how the next part of the lesson works. We don't need to use or make our own functions just yet. We do need to make our own variables more common than we make functions, but it's mostly about using variables and using functions and using like assignment to variables, like when we're putting data inside of a variable. And that's going to be how we modify our HTML elements. Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, so we've learned HTML, we've learned CSS, and we've learned JavaScript, but we can further kind of pair them together. Since JavaScript allows you to directly manipulate the contents of a page through what we call a document variable. So inside of JavaScript, there's a variable called document, which keeps track of whatever's on the HTML page, and we can pretty much directly alter the contents of our HTML page. So for example, here's the variable document, and it provides a function called getElementById. And the name of it is pretty self-explanatory. It gets an element or an HTML tag by its ID. So in this case, if I had like any one of these options, any one of these, it would return those. So if I had a button called turtle text, if I had a paragraph called turtle text, header, italics, it doesn't matter what kind of tag it is, as long as it has the associated ID of turtle text, it will get returned. But keep in mind that this only returns one element. So if you have multiple IDs with the name turtle text, it won't return all of them. It'll instead just return one. So for demonstration purposes, let's create a variable called turtle text. And we've made it get it by ID from our document called turtle dash text. And through that variable, we can actually change the contents of our element pretty much. So I think a better way to show this is through examples. Okay. So I'm going to close out CSS for the time being. Say if I have a paragraph tag called with an ID greeting, and I had hello there. I can actually, from our JavaScript, you can do var greet is equal to document.get element by ID greeting. And I can do greet.inner text is equal to, I don't know, we can say good morning. So this runs. You can see that despite us saying hello there, the JavaScript has directly changed the inner text of our paragraph tag. So similarly, we can actually add styles. We can add styles to our IDs tags through CSS through our style property, and we can directly write CSS code. So if I wanted to say color green, make sure I add a semicolon, it's going to change the color to green. Or if I wanted white to make it disappear, that is also a possibility. If I wanted red, you can do that too. So JavaScript pretty much allows us to change everything from our HTML file. And we can also even add an on click, similar to how we did a button on click. You can add on clicks to pretty much anything. So we can add greet.onClick is equal to a function. We can make it alert. So now when I click on this, it's going to alert. So notice that we haven't actually provided a function name here, but that's pretty much because it's been auto-assigned on click because we said greet.onClick is equal to a function. You don't need to know that, but that's just a cool thing you can do. So you can, similar to inner text, you can also change the inner HTML. So you can actually embed different things. So we can say test. And you can notice that it's now embedded inside of this. Yeah, there are a whole bunch of other things you can change for each element, but these are the basics that we're going to use. So I wanted to elaborate more on the function definition. These are two different ways to say the same thing. It's just that over here, we haven't provided a function name. Over here, we are providing a function name. It's just a nitty bitty. You guys don't need to know that, but just wanted to elaborate. And after learning all of this, a pretty basic project that we can start off on is a random number generator. So we pretty much click a button and it gives us a random number between the range from 0 to 100. Okay, let me delete all of the code and we can get started. Furkan, do you want to do it or should I?
I think you should do it. This is kind of more your idea. So.
Okay. So first things first, we're going to start off with creating a button, just saying random number. So we've created a button, but now we want to add an on click. right? So whenever the user clicks the button, we want to update a text somewhere. So we're going to say on click is equal to random number or whatever function you want to call it. We'll add it to our JavaScript later. So now in our JavaScript file, I'm going to write function random number. Let me zoom in a little more. Random number. And each time we click the button, I want it to update a text or whatnot. So okay. So I'm going to add a text here, and I'm going to call this ID of number update, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't have to be number update. It can be gibberish. Doesn't matter. I'm calling it number update. It's going to create a variable inside of a JavaScript file called random number or num. Sure. Is equal to document.get element by ID. And you want to get the ID of number update. Okay. So now that we have the HTML tag itself, we can update the inner text of it to num.inner text is equal to math.random. Now math.random returns a number between 0 to 1, a random number between 0 to 1. So if I click this, you'll see that it's a really, really long number. So what I'm just going to do is multiply by 100. So now I get a random number, and I just want to round it. So I'm going to do math.round. So now this rounds a number. It gets a random number between 0 to 1. It multiplies it to 100, and it rounds the number. So now if I keep clicking random number, you get random numbers generated.
Yeah, and just a quick interruption, sorry. To anyone that just some clarification. So these round and random things that Audie's using, those are all just functions as well. And anything that follows like the dot, or like you're saying, like there's like the variable like document and there's math and things like that. Those are just like things that you could think of those as things that like house those functions, you know?
Yeah. And again, I want to elaborate on JavaScript syntax. Make sure to have open and closing curly brackets. Make sure you also have open and closing parentheses whenever you open them. Make sure to close everything you open. And functions should always, if you're calling them, they should always have parentheses next to them. And make sure to enter your lines with semicolons. Okay, and you can obviously style this, but I think we're past that.
Yeah, styling isn't necessary. You could actually like minimize the CSS. I think it's more about
yeah. Okay. Are there any questions?
And if you guys want to like refresh an exercise, you can actually do that button styling like Audie was about to do. You can style it however you want. Maybe you want to like make it larger. You want to add some padding to it. You know.